This is the DG Podcast. We're coming back for episode 90, part B. We're going to have talk about net neutrality this episode, just because the FCC went ahead and did their Title II pass thing, and 3-2 on the pass thing. So we're going to be talking a lot about net neutrality tonight. But first, anything new from you?
No, not anything specific. I still plodding through some Dreamcast games. I've been watching Attack on Titan. But yeah. We, just as a by the way, if you're joining us simply because you're mildly curious as to what sort of inane thing we might have to say about net neutrality, then welcome. If you disagree, then that's super great. If you want to disagree,
hear from you.
Then please email us at thedistractedgamers@gmail.com. Whatever you want to. It doesn't bother us if you disagree, and we expect that most people probably disagree with our general point of view, and we're going to try and explain net neutrality and how the FCC run things as best as we can and as simple as we can, without too much hyperbole or speculation.
Right. So, as you know, I've been reading those Gottfried and Felix books that I found.
Right.
I'm on this one. It's called The Road of Skulls.
Uh-huh.
And it's actually kind of fascinating the way that they've structured it. There's this prophecy that if Gottfried finds his doom in this particular instance, it will destroy the world.
Wow.
So
he has to allow himself to stay alive, so to speak.
Something like that. It's kind of funny the way that they're setting it up. And it actually makes kind of sense, the way that that they've set this up. How if he dies, it will destroy the world. But like I said, I'll have to see how it goes, because there's actually a lot of interesting people in this one. There's this guy, he's a Chaos Warrior named Kanto, the Unsworn.
Mm-hmm.
He is a Chaos Warrior, and he is got the full armor and everything that's grafted to his body and whatnot. The guy isn't like any Chaos Warrior that I've ever read about before, because he is not sworn to any god. That's why he's called the Unsworn.
What do they call them? It's something like Chaos Undivided. Technically, Chaos Warriors usually swear to one specific god or another.
Right.
But they can actually sort of not swear to any and try and draw on all of them.
Yeah, and this is kind of
called.
He doesn't want to rely on any one god in particular.
Uh-huh.
But he wants the general goal of chaos to advance. He likes the bloodshed, likes the violence and stuff. He wants to go out and maraud and all that other stuff and kill people. But right now he's kind of roped in with this Khorne band that they're having, that Gottfried and Felix and the rest of the dwarves and stuff are having to deal with at this time. But he's there because basically the head of this war band told him, if you don't come with me, I will kill you. And so he's like, okay. But he's like looking for a way to get out of it, even at, just to not get caught up in everything and get roped into this whole we worship Khorne and blood for the blood god and all that other stuff.
It's called Chaos Undivided. Chaos Undivided venerates chaos itself.
Right.
And sees the four major chaos gods as a single pantheon to be worshipped equally as different emanations of the same universal force. So you literally can just worship chaos as opposed to follow one specific god. Right.
And see, I'd never read I haven't read a lot of the Warhammer books and stuff, and so I hadn't read about any of these guys that were just like, I'm not from Slaanesh, I'm not a worshipper of Khorne, I'm just a chaos worshipper.
And
he's actually a lot smarter about things than any of the other people that I've run into so far, as far as chaos worship goes, because he's like, yes, I want chaos, but I'm going to think about this first. And I'm going to do it the best way possible rather than I'm just going to run screaming at the enemy and hope that I can kill them.
Like Korn.
Yeah.
The only one that seems to be somewhat attractive, not that I'm going to join Chaos, is Tzeentch. Because a lot of the other ones sort of drive you mad.
Right.
Like Korn makes you bloodthirsty. Slanesh sort of turns you into weird piles of goo.
Mutants, yeah.
Well, no, it's more like just indulging in the baser parts of your humanity.
Right.
Nurgle is just gross.
Yeah.
The only attraction Nurgle gives you is eternal life. Because nothing hurts you at that point.
Nurgle's the pestilential one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he is awful.
Yeah, nobody likes Nurgle, but he does give you eternal life and makes you essentially immune to pain and things.
Right.
Sort of you transcend the problems, the baser problems of life. At any rate.
Well, I was reading Elf Slayer, and they had to deal with some dark elves who were worshippers of Slanesh. And I just thought it was funny that even as this, like, demon of Slanesh was fighting them, they were dying of pleasure.
Oh yeah, they're so creepy.
Yeah, it was awful. So, rolling on, the FCC, I have a decent way to start this if you want. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the best way to start this is to talk about the FCC itself, I think, in my opinion. Okay. The FCC was created in 1934, mainly in a way to regulate radio broadcasts.
Right.
Because radio broadcasts were getting spread out quite a bit. And you had problems where certain radio stations were being put in and then stuff was being put in too close and then the signals would compete with each other.
Right.
Which I think is fair to have a federal commission to regulate that sort of thing, because you don't want competition to exist where they're literally trying to suppress the signal of other groups or that sort of thing.
And it's kind of helpful to have a central repository for the signal numbers. So you can say, okay,
well, somebody's already using that, you can use this. Or
exactly. It's helpful in that way.
It was put together by Congress.
Right.
I don't recall exactly the federal mandate, but it was a federal mandate, the Communications Act of 1934. At any rate, the FCC was put together to regulate those things across all 50 states, including the other U.S. possessions, and it made sense at the time. Now, why we're talking about the FCC and its immediate regulation existence is because the FCC initially was created to simply regulate how communications and stuff was put together, not to control what was allowed and what wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
As time went on, you ran into a few problems, mainly because the FCC would allow certain things like monopolies and whatnot, especially almost like government-sanctioned monopolies.
Right.
Specifically to point at the telephone monopoly in, I believe it was the 1960s. Here, let me read this little blurb that I have on Wikipedia. It says, the important relationship of the FCC and the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, has evolved over several years. For many, the FCC and state officials agreed to regulate the telephone systems as a natural monopoly. The FCC controlled telephone rates to limit the profits of AT&T and ensure non-discriminatory pricing. In the 1960s, the FCC began allowing other long-distance companies, namely MCI, to offer specialized services. In the 1970s, the FCC allowed other companies to expand offerings to the public. A lawsuit in 1982, led by the Justice Department after AT&T underpriced other companies, resulted in the split of the Bells from AT&T. Beginning in 1984, the FCC implemented a new goal that all long-distance communications had equal access to the local phone company's customers. The reason why this is a problem is because early on, the FCC has had a habit of picking the winners.
Uh-huh.
Who's allowed to be in control of what, and who's allowed to dominate certain parts of the market, so to speak. Specifically, the key word would be a natural monopoly. those who are in the position to control said things are naturally going to dominate said parts. Now, the reason why that's an issue is monopolies are dangerous.
Right.
Not just dangerous for consumers, but dangerous for the market itself. A lot of people complain about monopolies because it's a terrible aspect of capitalism. The problem is monopolies isn't capitalism at all. It's more oligarchical, if that makes sense.
Right.
If I pronounce that correctly. It's more of in capitalism you have competition for your consumers.
Right.
For your money. In a monopoly, one person dominates and then they can just regulate the price that they want to because nobody is actually going to undercut them and force them to actually improve service or cheapen cost or that sort of thing.
Right.
And monopolies are not good for the market. They're not good for consumers. Not good for anybody.
Except for the monopoly.
Exactly. Now, we're in a position today where a lot of internet service providers are actually somewhat dominant in the market, specifically groups like Comcast, which dominates a huge section of the country, as well as Time Warner Cable, as well as AT&T, which has become a big competitor in the broadband service area.
Yeah, this website says that we have Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, Time Warner, Cox, and Charter are the big ones.
Who are all dominating certain parts of the country.
Right.
Now, the reason why it's necessary to point this out is because each of these are monopolies in their own right because they control specific parts of the country. Verizon doesn't step into Comcast's territory, really, and Comcast doesn't really step into Verizon's. They tend to sort of dominate certain areas, and the reason why that exists is because certain things like natural monopolies and other things are allowed to exist. Not just that, but specifically, when you have a cable provider sort of laying lines and using access to try and supply internet to certain areas, it tends to pass through public land.
Right.
Now, municipalities or local governments tend to want a piece of that money.
Right.
So what they do is they regulate groups like Comcast as they're laying down their lines or trying to be able to spread to certain areas, and they say, well, we want so much money, and in return, you'll be allowed to set up here, and not only that, but we will discourage other people from coming in to compete with you.
Right.
So Comcast is paying basically bribes, but it's not to the point where it's illegal. It's sort of roundabout bribes by sort of packing the treasuries of local municipalities so that they can dominate certain areas of the country. We live out in Utah. It's very difficult for us to pick anybody but Comcast.
Yes.
We could do Dish, but Dish isn't that great. There's sort of other providers and that sort of thing, but Comcast is basically the company you have to get. They package it with your cable. They're the only really decent broadband service provider out here. I hate Comcast. Comcast was literally voted the worst company in America last year.
Right.
I hate Comcast.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I hate their policies. They pick, not only that, but Comcast controls who is allowed on their cable company. So the way Comcast sets up channels and such,
right,
which is really terrible. They say, okay, well, we want to provide a certain amount of service and a certain amount of variety to our customers, so a certain amount of channels and that sort of thing.
Right.
So we're going to allow, let's say, a certain news stations like Fox News, CNN, CBS, this, and this. And then they're like, well, we're going to allow something like Al Jazeera as well.
Right.
Well, the problem with Al Jazeera is they're not only hugely political, but hugely politically slanted towards, I don't know, radical jihadism.
Right.
And if that's something that you disagree with, you don't actually have that option because Comcast is the one that chooses the stations.
Right.
So your money is equally paid to go to places like Al Jazeera to allow them on stations when, by and large, nobody in this country watches it. If they only existed solely based off of commercials and what they were allowed to get in for funding, then they wouldn't exist on Comcast. But Comcast allows them on because they decide who's allowed to be on their stations.
Right.
They control what we're allowed to see, which is why stuff like on demand has become a real big problem for Comcast. You were going to say something in between?
Probably, but I don't remember it now. I can tell you, though, that, we were talking about this on our drive back from class tonight. My monthly cable bill, not cable for television, but internet, is about $75 a month. And that's ridiculous, first of all. But to go to anybody else would, I'd have to take a hit in my service. So I was trying to go through Comcast to find out if there was a way for me to get my bill lowered by maybe packaging, because right now I don't have cable television. And so I called them up, and their deal is if you package it, it's supposed to be they're supposed to charge you less or whatever. It actually would increase my cable bill to. It turns out it's like $79 a month if I package with and get internet and cable television.
Well, is it that it's so much for one or the other, and if you put it together, then both of them are slightly cheaper, sort of thing, or?
Yeah, I assume that's what it is. It's like you put them both together, and if you basically if you get one, it's like $75. Then television or internet, it doesn't matter. It goes up to $79 if you get both of them, but basically you're paying for two things. Each is about half the price, but the thing is that it makes it easier for them to get more money from you, not you having a cheaper internet bill or whatever. They're still going to charge you more, and they're still going to charge you what they want to charge you. We were talking about this being, but competition and stuff. But go ahead.
So what I'm trying to lay down is that ISP monopolies, broadband service provider monopolies, don't exist in a vacuum. It's not like Comcast simply goes out and it's like, well, we're going to crush the competition to be the dominant area. A lot of this is sort of government allowing them to be the most important people in the neighborhood.
Right.
Government has been choosing the winners, not just local municipalities, but the FCC itself. So blaming outright these large corporations for a lot of things is not necessarily accurate when it seems that our own government is sort of causing the problem in the first place. So what we're really here to talk about is net neutrality.
Right.
And especially with my long setup. Now, net neutrality specifically. So let's talk about this in as simple a way as we can. Let's say we have Comcast, and Netflix is something very popular, which is the most commonly used example, so we're going to use that. So Netflix is super popular. Everybody likes to sit down and watch Netflix. Most people use it and that sort of thing. It accounts for, I think it's like 34% of broadband usage. Netflix is a big deal. So Comcast decides, well, Netflix is dominating a lot of the broadband network.
Right.
In a, I don't know, allegorical way, let's say it's a highway, and if all of the different cars is the amount of data that's going by, the different packets of data, Netflix dominates a good majority of that highway. Right. Now, what the internet service provider is saying, because you use so much of our highway, 34% specifically, we're going to charge you more because you dominate so much of it that it's slowing down traffic. Right. So we want you to pay extra so that you get preferred status, so to speak, so that your stuff goes through faster, so that when those data packets go through, they look for Netflix first and maybe like a Google search later. Right. Just so that your streaming comes through cleaner and better and everything works out fine. Now, the reason why Netflix doesn't like this is because they're getting charged extra solely for their service. Now, a lot of people will break down the big reason why net neutrality is such a big deal is because they don't want internet service providers to choose who's allowed to have more access to something and who's allowed to have less. So the internet service provider could literally say, we don't like that you're looking at this website. We're going to throttle back your usage or your access to that website. And we're going to actually throttle up or allow more of those cars to go through of Netflix because they pay us extra money. Now, internet service providers can actually do this if they want to. They're basically a private company.
Right.
But people don't like it because then you sort of see people regulating it, somewhat free speech. And I know people go, oh, well, they're going to do this because they don't agree with it. Comcast is not in the business of trying to restrict free speech.
Right.
They want your money.
Exactly.
This is what companies do. They want your money. They don't really care if you're like a Nazi Holocaust denying 9/11 truther group. They don't care if you're paying them money for Comcast and they're like, whatever, have your website. Comcast doesn't care. What they do care about is if you're slowing down everybody's internet access by dominating a huge portion of the bandwidth, then they want to charge you more because you're taking up a huge amount of the bandwidth. Now, what a person sitting back would say is, well, Netflix is a service, and because they're charging more, because they're restricting access, Netflix customers can't get what they paid for because this internet service, Comcast, is so greedy, and they're just this big corporation that's greedy, and they just want more money.
Right.
And I was like, well, first of all, a corporation, its job is to earn money.
Right.
That's the only purpose any business has, is to earn money.
Sure, they may provide a service.
To provide a service.
But they're going to charge you for it.
That people want. Now, they can't earn money if they're not providing a service that people don't want. If Comcast was out there selling like paper airplanes, I don't think they'd be doing it anymore.
I can make my own paper airplanes.
Now, it sounds stupid that I have to explain this, but it seems to a lot of people come out there and go, well, Comcast just wants money. I was like, of course they do. That's what a business is for.
I want money. Does that make me evil?
I don't. It does, apparently.
I guess so.
I don't understand why people are confused that Comcast trying to earn money somehow equates them to evil. They exist solely to earn money. And if they provide a service that you want and you're willing to pay for, then you give them money for it. If you don't like Comcast, then you give somebody else money for it. But wait, there really is no competition out there because Comcast and a bunch of these other companies dominate the market because of how kickbacks and other things are set up. I'll remind you that I think it's like 54 congressmen around now are all taking huge amounts of money from AT&T, another huge broadband service provider. So all of our politicians, I guarantee, are taking large amounts of money from a lot of these different companies anyway. Comcast literally could, if they're in competition with another company, go, well, if we don't like them, we're going to throttle back this information or throttle up this information. A lot of people are afraid that this could lead to a less free internet. In the past, the internet has basically been understood to be free. All data is equal. They just let it go through. If Comcast doesn't charge extra and treats everything as equal data, which I think everybody wants as far as net neutrality is concerned, then all of the data will start to cram up on the highway and everything will start to slow down the traffic. So your conclusion would be, well, why don't they add more lanes to this highway? Why don't they expand broadband network to allow more access? Well, then Comcast will go, well, in order to pay for that, we're going to have to raise everybody's prices. We're going to have to...
We need the money to do it.
We need the money to do it. We're going to have to add more of this or more of this. And remember, Comcast doesn't have to compete with anybody, so they can set the prices any way they want to. So, because of this fear, everybody wanted to create this thing called net neutrality, which is sort of in existence before. And the main problem was because groups started to throttle back internet access or demand people to pay more because they used more. And the fear was this would spread to them choosing choosing to allow more access to some websites and less access to others. They hadn't done that yet. Which is sort of conspiratorial to assume that Comcast is going to go out there and be like, well, we don't want these people to have access. You know what I mean? Just like steepling their hands in evil contemplation. And
how can we screw over
that actually hasn't
the consumers?
happened yet, which is speculation. One thing you can always trust when it comes to companies is they want money. And it will always be their motivation. So sort of attributing some sort of political goal or aim is inaccurate unless you believe some political party is asking them to do it. But they're not going to throw it back.
I was just thinking about this, and a way to compare this, and I think it's a pretty apt comparison, is if you think about public utilities. We have water, power, and gas. Now, right now, what they do is they the company that is doing power or whatever, they monitor your usage. And then they charge you based on how much you use.
Right. Which is not an uncommon practice across anything. This happens all of the time. If you use more internet, theoretically, you would have to pay more.
And see, that's the thing that people don't get. That they're wanting this to be, and I've seen this argument several times before, but they want internet to be a right, not a privilege. They want it to be what they want it to be, rather than wanting it to
what it actually is.
To be what it is.
It would be more accurate to classify internet access as somewhat of a luxury.
Yes, definitely.
You don't have to have internet access. You probably have to have water. You don't really have to have electricity. Theoretically, you could just have a fireplace.
And
to keep yourself warm.
This goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I know this is way beyond the scope of our thing, but if you think about what Maslow's hierarchy of needs basically says that what you need to survive is food, water, and shelter. And that's it.
Yeah.
Anything else is a luxury.
In that order. Anything else is extra. Anything else is a luxury. So getting upset when you can't play Call of Duty because your access is got more restrictions is kind of nonsense. The thing is, Comcast and a lot of other companies have done things like charge more for more access before. The internet for the longest time, it existed almost like the Wild West. Whatever people put up there was up there, and there was no restrictions, no regulations, and whatever happened, and that was it. It was basically the Wild West. Roving bands of people wander around. You have people white knighting across the internet trying to cause their own sense of justice. It's all goofy, but this is how things have been going on for quite some time.
Very much so.
It's a chaotic world, but it's the world that we have. This might be at the end, and we'll speculate that on that later. But what I meant by Comcast is doing that before is in the past, the sort of free data and free access across the board doesn't actually exist anymore because it costs Comcast too much to do those sorts of things. Comcast is my example. We're talking all ISPs when I tend to talk about Comcast. But it's like you could have as much data as you wanted to, but now Comcast is saying, well, too much data is coming from your house. And now they're capping it at like something like 200 gigs. 200 or 300 gigs, I can't recall what it's supposed to be. What's allowed to come from, what you're allowed to download, I think it's per year.
Really?
Or no, that seems too much. I think that's per month or something like that. The problem, and for gamers out there, that affects a huge amount. Because now that everything's pushing to be more digital and less physical copy, so let's say you're sitting on your PS4 and you're like, well, I want to play this new game. I'm going to buy it day one digital. I'm going to download it, and it looks awesome. Maybe it's I don't know, whatever new popular game that's out, some new Assassin's Creed, hoping it doesn't suck or it's not glitchy as all get out. And the game comes out, you download it that day, but we're talking those are huge amounts of
you're downloading gigs of data
that you have to stream in. Elder Scrolls Online itself is something like 40-something gigs now. File size and game size has gotten way bigger than it was.
Because the media can support it.
And when Comcast... Right. But Comcast is saying, well, we can't support that much bandwidth. We have to expand and this, and this. All of this is going to end up costing more because you're using more. The day of just whatever I want and anything I want and everything's going to be cheap might be dead now. And especially with how net neutrality is coming in, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So we should have a pros and cons as we talk about net neutrality. Is there anything you want to add? Did I explain it sufficiently so that people understand sort of the issue with net neutrality? Anything you want to add to?
The thing is that, you know, we hear net neutrality and we hear let the internet be free. And I think people latch on to that free part. And they're like, yeah, let's let the internet be free. It's like, well, somebody's got to pay for it. So, yeah. And the thing is, that's one of the things that they don't tell you about net neutrality is that, you know, somebody is paying for it. And it will probably be us. But go ahead.
People treat it like a free speech issue.
It's not so much a free speech issue as a capitalism issue.
It's not really. Yeah, it's a market issue. It's about money. It has nothing to do with free speech. Now, they passed, it was last week, I can't remember specifically what day, but they passed net neutrality, or at least how they set it up. Now, here are essentially, do you have the law in front of you? Can you read generally what it does? Grab that really quick and I'll blow over you for a second.
Yeah, I got some stuff here.
Just what does net neutrality do? Okay. You got it, or
no? Go ahead. The thing is like this site, and I don't know how.
Well, okay.
Well, no. It's net neutrality. They say it's we have the right to communicate freely online, and it's the definition of an open internet. So it means that the internet, net neutrality means an internet that enables and protects free speech, but that's baloney.
Well, we'll find specifically what the law does, and I'll talk about how the law went down is an issue. So find specifically what the law does. While Jason's looking at that, let's remind ourselves that this came in as a 3-2 decision. Now, what that means is there are 5 people sitting on the FCC board who made this decision. 5 individuals. Now, I've heard a lot of people online go, well, this is the first time that the democratic process has really worked out for everybody to protect free speech. Well, first of all, it wasn't democratic. The dominant party in the country, which happens to be the Democrats at the time because they control the presidency, are the ones that get to choose who dominates the FCC board. Which is why there's 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans on the board, which is why 3 Democrats voted for and 2 Republicans voted against. It voted clearly across political lines. It wasn't democratic. We're talking 3 individuals who were politically appointed and unelected who had a huge effect on everybody's lives. Unelected officials who were politically appointed were the ones that made this decision and will basically affect everybody's life on how the internet is run. This has nothing to do with the democratic process at all. Essentially, this was a political sort of back and forth between 5 people. 3 people decided. Congress, who were elected, the president who was elected, Congress had nothing to do with it. They had no say in what happened. Nobody elected these individuals. And I heard some disgusting things. I literally heard it's like, well, this was a 3 out of 5 decision, so to speak. And then I read literally in Kotaku underneath like articles and stuff, people saying, well, now we need to find exactly who were the 2 that voted against and then go hang them in the streets. I kid you not. Somebody said that on the Kotaku page. I was like, really? This is what we've... It's like, not only were you not happy that you won, let's go murder the 2 that disagree with you politically.
Well...
It's literally they want to restrict your free speech. Yeah, that's what they want to do. This has nothing to do with whether or not the government should be controlling this. This has nothing to do with money. This has everything to do with they don't want you to have free speech. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on.
The FCC ruling, this says that the FCC ruled in favor of net neutrality by reclassifying broadband access as a telecommunications service and thus applying Title II Common Carrier of the Communications Act of 1934 to internet service providers. That's what it does. Now,
Okay.
as far as what the common carrier means is
what is the law? Actually?
Internet networks are treated like common carriers. ISPs are largely immune from liability for third-party content. Let's see. Some of this doesn't really make sense because it's we've got the 1934 Communications Act, and then there's the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that made revisions to the Title II provisions regarding the common carriers. The act, the Telecommunications Act of 96, gave telephone companies the option of providing video programming on a common carrier basis. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's just a mess.
I could give you a vague translation of what the law actually does. So vaguely, off the top of my head, because I've read parts of the law and I've read a lot of reviews and stuff. So specifically, here's what the law actually does from what I recall. If I get something wrong, then be sure to hang me in the streets, apparently. You are not allowed to discriminate against one data over another. So you can't throttle back access to one group and allow more access to another group. However, here's the problem. That doesn't say that you can't throttle back all of it or throttle forward all of it. You just can't do it restrictive. You can't specifically point out one person to throttle back their access. You could just throttle back everybody's access. That's what making it all quote unquote equal. One of the other provisions that were part of the law is that if the FCC determined, it was something vague, like if the FCC determined that there was violations when it came to this sort of thing, like things weren't done fairly and they were restricting specifically on one person or that sort of thing, it was sort of stated in a really weird, vague way, then they had the ability to step in and say, well, you can't do this or that. The reason why it's stated as vague, and this is one thing that's concerning most people, is basically the FCC can come in and basically do, well, because of this vague statement, we can do whatever we want to. We could step in and be like, well, you're not being fair. And they're like, well, this has nothing to do with throttling data. And they're like, well, that doesn't matter. It's sort of vaguely related to this. We're doing it under this title of this chapter, and this is how we're going to handle it.
So this thing that I found here, it says, the new rules rooted in Title II of the Communications Act ban throttling, blocking, and paid prioritization. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Specifically. What does that mean to everybody? Well, that actually really doesn't change
right
anything.
now.
Nothing's actually different. You don't have a freer internet. Immediately when you go home, Netflix isn't going to be faster. Actually, stuff across the board will probably be slow.
I actually was reading this earlier, and it says 7 things that net neutrality won't do. And one of them says right off the top, your home broadband will not be faster. And actually, what it's going to do is it's going to force some of these companies like Netflix, YouTube, etc., that use a lot of bandwidth to probably start charging for their services more, or in YouTube's case, charging for their services. And so you could actually start being required to pay more in certain instances. It won't eliminate wireless data caps. Actually, a lot of the net neutrality stuff doesn't even touch wireless providers. They can still they can still put in the wireless data caps. They can still throttle your service. But yeah, it's like if they're wireless, it says right here, wireless operators will still be allowed to slow your mobile internet connection in certain circumstances, but they'll have to tell you that they're doing it and why.
Exactly. Specifically, where if you go over your data
Right.
Restrictions,
Right.
they can still pull you back. So what does this actually mean? It means that they can't charge specifically Netflix more money for more access, which means everything will start to get slower, theoretically, because they can't treat data
But they could start charging everyone
They don't.
more for their services.
Oh, yeah. They can start charging everyone, especially if they need to expand because access becomes more restricted and stuff starts to become slower. Then everybody starts to complain that, internet's too slow. They're like, okay, we'll expand, and everybody's prices will go up. So theoretically, stuff could go slower
And start to cost
more. Does that make sense? This is an economic argument. It's not a free speech argument.
Right here, the net neutrality will not create competition. It will, in certain cases, stifle it.
That is the biggest mistake when it comes to net neutrality. People think it's actually going to help competition when it's not. Now, specifically, when they talk about it's actually going to encourage competition, is they actually allowed for a provision so that local municipalities can create their own broadband service. Almost like a utility, so you pay the city for electricity, water, broadband. First of all, do you really want your city charging you for broadband service? Literally, your government is now providing your internet service. So the government's turned from picking who's allowed to be the monopoly of certain areas to now providing their own broadband service. And I guarantee you they will not allow competition when they're the ones providing the service. They will kick out anybody who's in there.
Right, or they'll make a nominal effort to include competition, you know.
They'll charge more to Comcast to make sure that it's cheaper to go for the local service and that sort of thing. That's the only thing that people would argue, theoretically, that it actually encourages competition by allowing the government itself. Do you really want the government accessing what you do and do not access on the internet? Does that sound like a freer internet or more restrictive? Do you like the idea of the government logging what websites you go to? Because they're probably doing it in some way anyway. Now you're literally paying them to do it. Yeah. That sounds awesome, everybody. Let's allow our local municipalities. I guarantee you the police department in your local town right now are plugging in and being like, yeah, as we provide your internet service, we're also checking what you're looking at. Did you look at that site on Al Jazeera?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you're a terrorist. I'm actually doing a research paper because I'm in college. Maybe you're
going to try to fly home and you'll be flagged by the TSA or whatever they are. You'll be full body cavity search, man.
You'll get on a no-fly list. This is all hyperbole, but the point being that it doesn't actually encourage competition at all.
One of the things that
to stifle
it would
not
do
only
if
that,
it... Okay, so we're talking about it actually stifling competition. One of the things that it's not going to do is stop the Comcast Time Warner cable merger, which is something that needs to happen to
it's not going to change that at all. If I recall, there was a provision, at least in California, that encouraged it. I think there might be something in the law that still allows for it to occur. So now we're going to create even more powerful and dominant internet service providers. But they're going to be more... the only thing they can't do is charge other people more money for stuff like Netflix and whatnot. Netflix... The reason why stuff like this becomes so heated is it comes home because nobody would care whether or not net neutrality was passed unless people out there were sort of ringing the bell and saying it could affect whether or not you can go home and watch House of Cards. And then everybody gets upset because now all of a sudden it could affect me and what I do every day because the scope of what we see and what we care about is very narrow. When people complain about, oh, well, we don't really care about what's happening in the rest of the world, that's basically because you focus on what's happening around you, and then you go to state politics, and you can go to federal politics, and if 300 people die in a plane crash across the world, you might hear about it, but that's less important than sitting there taking a dump and watching Netflix. Which is why most people don't really care about the issue at all, unless it's going to affect their daily lives. Now, let's actually talk about the money, because everybody made this sound like it was everybody banded together in the democratic process to get their voices heard. Millions signed a petition so that everybody knew that net neutrality is going to protect our freedom of speech. Okay, so let's talk about that. I guarantee you that accounted for, as far as influence in the FCC, that accounted for probably
just to
5%.
To go over, I found a site that shows the numbers. 4 million comments to the FCC, over 2.5 million petition signatures, 10 million emails to Congress, 500,000 calls to FCC and Congress, 250,000 petition signatures to President Obama for support, 100 on-the-ground protests and parties at Comcast, FCC, and White House, 101 civil rights groups sign on for Title II, 20 million plus social media posts, 535 websites for every member of Congress and their position on Title II, 10 days occupying FCC lawn, 2 local hearings, 1 driveway blocked, and 1 airplane banner over Comcast headquarters.
Here's something I don't like about that sort of occupying lawns and throwing protests. That's it. You're basically a bully at that point. You're trying to bully people
blocking
into making decisions
driveway.
the way you like. That's a disgusting way of going about things. Honestly, people, it's a disgusting way of going about things. You're bullying people because you disagree with things that they're doing. Now, it's like, oh, the 2.5 million petitions. There are 300 million people in this country. How much do you think that the country is really like, oh, up in arms about it? At any rate, that accounted for almost nothing when it came to influencing this decision. Why do I say that? Okay. The best point I actually read in a blog is somebody literally said, yay, everybody, net neutrality won, the oligarchs have won. Because the oligarchs are specifically the big companies who are pushing to prevent this, i.e. Netflix. Because Netflix, surprise, surprise, is a big evil corporation that also wants money too. They don't want to have to pay more money for more access.
That's a hit to their bottom line. So their profit margin.
Exactly. One of the biggest companies that exist right now, Google, huge, massive company, is super behind this. Microsoft, surprise, surprise, is swinging its weight so that they don't get charged more for more access. Let's see, who else was on there? It was Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, all of these cool things who are actually massive corporations who are only obsessed about money, and they are the ones that only want more money, and they don't want to have to pay out to groups like Comcast or elsewise. That's the influence that swung this around. It wasn't you standing outside with a sign because you care about freedom of speech. It had nothing to do with
You still have the ability to post whatever you want, whether net neutrality is approved or not.
Yeah, that's still not an issue. I guarantee you Comcast doesn't care. You know who I could tell you who does care? What you do post, and exactly what you do post and what you don't? The FCC.
Exactly.
Specifically the federal government. Now, why is that an issue? Well, let's talk about the FCC having set up and how they run previous organizations, specifically radio, television, and the like. Now, radio has been around for a long time, but the FCC itself regulates radio. Now, you'll say, oh, well, like you pointed out, it's so that different radio stations don't compete with one another, and they don't have interference and that sort of thing. I was like, yeah, that's true. But there's also more
if
issues.
You swear on the radio or on television and you don't bleep it, they come down on you. They're the ones that fine you for that.
The FCC is on your butt. Yeah, because they are the ones who decide what is allowed and what isn't. The internet is the Wild West. You can do whatever you want to. You can say the most disgusting things. And nobody says anything. The FCC is the one that regulates whether or not radio stations are allowed to do certain things. They're the ones that regulate standards, like how much news can be broadcast. They literally say you can only do this much during this amount of time and that sort of thing. You cannot, like, I can't go and set up my own radio station. I can't buy the equipment and I can't start broadcasting. I would have to pay the FCC a huge amount of regulatory fees. I have to register my radio station. I have to get a license. I probably have to have a degree of education, some business related degree. I probably have to have a certain amount of training. I have to go through a certain amount of training with the FCC, or at least the federal government, to get my radio station registered. Even when all of that is done, I probably still won't get my license. Why? Because different radio groups out there don't want competition. They don't want me out on the radio waves going like, well, this, and this, which is why illegal radio stations have existed for a long time. If you recall, back in the 60s, there was an illegal radio station that was broadcasting music in English.
Yeah, I mean...
Do you remember this?
I haven't.
They actually made a movie about it, if you've seen it. They were broadcasting music that the English government decided was inappropriate. It was a lot of sort of government protest stuff during the 80s and whatnot. A lot of early rock and that sort of thing, Dylan and what have you. Well, the government decided that they didn't approve of the messages that existed in this rock music and what have you. You know, kids and their rock music or whatever. So what this group did in order to transmit this radio station is they went and bought a boat. Uh-huh. We're talking like a big hauler. And they went off into international waters and broadcast towards England in order to get around the regulations. And I think actually they made a huge effort, the English Empire, to try and actually find the boat and sink it at one point. Like, that's how angry it got. I can't actually create my own radio station. Well, they would stomp me like a bug. And it's not just the government, but because they're getting money from groups.
You could start your own radio station, but it's so prohibitively expensive because of all the regulations and all the licensing that you have to do. Exactly. You're not going to actually be able to establish your radio station because you don't have the deep pockets that would be able to do it.
Right. Now, I couldn't do that with television either. I can't make my own TV show. I have to go to somebody who's already owns the station, who's already gone through the rigmarole, who's already paid the fees, who's already monitored by the FCC, who
sometimes they have those local access cable channels that allow that kind of crap.
I can't have my own radio station. I can't have my own television station. I have to get allowed by other people and public access, like late at night at 2 a.m, and then it's just me ranting, but I can't have cursing in there because the FCC will stomp down on me. How many times have you seen Family Guy episodes where they make fun of the FCC? Because constantly the FCC shows up and says, well, you can't show that. Because we have certain standards that are allowed. Are you seriously believing that when the FCC starts regulating and allowing what's allowed to do this or what's allowed to do that the FCC won't step in and start to actually start to regulate propriety when it comes
it's like
to
I said before,
internet information?
And I said it to you, not on here, but the thing is that once the government gets their toe in the door, you can't get them back out. And
part of the law is so vague that they could start doing whatever they want to. Because now that they have the door open, now, will this lead to the FCC, I don't know, issuing licenses and regulating whether or not certain websites are allowed to do this or certain websites are allowed to do that? I don't know. I hope not, but it could. because they've done it in the past. They've done it with radio and they've done it with television. They heavily control what's allowed on those two things. In order to be able to have really inappropriate content, you have to pay for it. I kid you not. Cable television, you have to pay cable television to have access to certain things. And even then,
it's the way you said it. It's just so funny. Oh, I know. There's the pay-per-view stuff that goes out there.
HBO, Stars. Yeah. When they show the naughty stuff, you can't watch a Game of Thrones on cable television, let alone public access.
Right.
You're literally paying extra money to see Game of Thrones. Everybody, you have to. That's how people watch Game of Thrones. That's how they get access to it, is you have to pay for HBO. You might have to pay extra to be able to see certain things on the internet. The days of just free, naughty access that Chance gets to run around and, get excited about might be over, because now they're stepping in. I found this
website called battleforthenet.com, and we'll post it on our site. And you scroll down past the epic victory sign and who voted for the FCC. The way they've got it is so stupid. Anyway, they have, we are Team Internet and we support the Title II rules. You will notice in this section that the first, five lines are dominated by companies, not people. The last line has one company on it and the rest of it is people. Now, one of the things is that they've got quotes from each of these companies. Like Mozilla said, "This is our final stand because the web is not owned by any one of us. Rather, it is shared by all of us. That is why net neutrality is so important." Netflix said, "Title II net neutrality is the only way for the FCC to protect the open internet." Well, I just was going around, looking at some of these quotes. Valentine McKay Riddle, PhD. Net neutrality, absolutely necessary and one of man's and woman's inalienable rights. There is no such thing as a right to the internet. None.
Oh, I hate it when people talk about rights like it's we all should have this, but it's not actually like a natural right. We're not talking about Locke's terms of natural rights. We're literally just walking around going, "Well,
and this is what people want. This is what they want.
Like
it's
everybody should have
about freedom of speech. It's not about having their internet throttled. They want it for free. They don't want the internet companies, the ISPs, to be charging them for their services." Now, again, on this thing, they have this letter. Because right at the top they say that the big companies, Comcast especially, are going to try to destroy our victory with their massive power in Congress. And so they want you to write. Yeah.
Yes, and then the massive power of Google and Facebook will swing their way too.
So anyway, they have this letter. They want you to put your name, email address, and all that other stuff. And basically they're going to send this letter to Congress. And this is the letter. "Dear Senators and Representatives, there is no doubt that the public wants real net neutrality. Right now, the Federal Communications Commission is on the brink of fixing a decade of bad policies and preventing ISPs from discriminating online. In short, let the FCC do its job. By reclassifying Internet Access Service under Title II of the Communications Act, the FCC can protect Internet users from online discrimination and blocking. Any other approach will fall short. Don't put the public in the slow lane. Protect real net neutrality now. Thank you."
I think what has mainly been the fear is when it came to... Because when people talk about freedom, a lot of it really comes down to stuff like file sharing. Comcast has had a long history of attacking file sharing sites and going after people who do file sharing. And a lot of that has to do with that Comcast is heavily connected with the music and movie industry and stuff. and there's a heavy amount of influence and push to try and make sure that people aren't doing that sort of thing. It's not free data, and a lot of people like the idea of just out there, well, we're sharing free information. It's not really information. Are you really being honest with yourself when you're saying you're just sharing information? You're taking music and you're just giving it to other people who aren't paying for it. At what point is your favorite artist actually earning any money? You would like to think that the artist is out there just to be like, well, I'm in this for the art, but I don't like eating. So, one of the smartest things, especially that I've seen some artists do, because by and large, artists don't actually make money. This will surprise everybody. Most artists don't actually make money from sales anymore, like record sales. They actually don't. Most of the money that's earned is from tours, especially concerts specifically. Record sales have dumped so badly the amount of money that they earn that, and part of it is hugely the file sharing. Another part of it is the amount of money
record companies that make money off of the record sales. That's why so many artists go on tour, because that's where they make their money. They don't have to pay that to the record companies.
That's why a lot of artists you find are poor as all get out when they were as popular as can be, i.e. MC
Well, yeah,
Hammer.
they tend to do that. Toni Braxton, for instance, had to... she was hugely popular, 90s-ish era, and she had to declare bankruptcy and sell her Grammys.
Who were the 3-girl group?
TLC.
Sang that Waterfall song. What was it?
Yeah. See, the thing is
TLC.
that's
they
what
declared bankruptcy. They declared bankruptcy as well. Michael Jackson, one of the biggest stars in the world, had huge financial problems. And we're sitting there like, no, we're just sharing it, man. It's just free information in the sky. Really, you're stealing it. Can we just be honest with ourselves? This is specifically what Bill Burr talked about, if you ever listen to the comedian. I completely agree with how he said it. He's like, look, if you're going to steal my comedy special, just admit that you stole it. Don't stand out there like, no, we're sharing it, man. He's like, no, look, you stole it. If you stole it, just admit it. He's like, I don't buy any of this, like, BS of like, oh no, just say you stole it. He's like, and can you at least give it like a week before you go and download it, so at least some people go out and purchase the stupid thing?
Right.
Because he knows that he's trying to earn money, and I think his last special cost him like $150,000 to put together.
Yeah.
Individuals putting those things together is way expensive.
Okay, go ahead.
Here's one thing I want to go back to the FCC on. Specifically, no, we don't need to wrap it up at all. We'll just keep going forever.
Let's do that.
Let's end with proprietary standards. The FCC has been criticized for a long time for ignoring international open standards. This is important. Instead of choosing proprietary standards or closed standards, instead they've chose closed standards instead of open standards. I.e., they've chosen to go after certain... let me read on before I get over technical on this. Or allowing communication companies to do so and implementing anti-competitive practice of vendor lock-in, thereby preventing free market. Vendor lock-in is a hugely important term that you need to actually understand. In economics, vendor lock-in is also known as proprietary lock-in or customer lock-in. Specifically, it makes a customer dependent on a certain vendor for products and services. So what happens, especially with a certain way that they've gone about things in the digital television, is... here, let me read this. In the case of digital TV, the FCC has chosen ATSC as a standard. Even though DVB was already in use around the world, they chose ATSC. in the U.S., and unlike competing standards, ATSC system is encumbered by numerous patents, and therefore royalties that make TV sets and DTV converters much more expensive than the rest of the world. Additionally, the claimed benefit of better reception in rural areas is more than negated in urban areas by multipath interference. So stuff is interfered. There's a lot of interference.
So if you want to get a good signal, you have to move out into the country.
Which apparently... Yeah, here's the stupid part.
Uh-huh.
The standard used by the rest of the world does not have
so we could have eliminated multipath interference, gotten decent reception in the country by just doing an open standard.
Yeah, vendor lock-in specifically is saying we're going to choose a restricted form of technology, in this case specifically, solely so that we can increase money on our end so that a few people can get rich. This is the FCC. This is not, we're out there looking out for you. They're literally picking the winners, and it's about the money. It's not about freedom of speech. It's about the money. Somebody's making money off of this new net neutrality deal, and the more the government has a hand in what's going on, the more of a problem it's going to be. It might not be a problem now because we talked specifically about what it does. But, and I could go into the speculation of, oh, well, you know, this could add to government restriction on what's accessed on the internet. They could start to regulate free speech like the FCC has done in the past on multiple occasions, whether or not it's radio or television. They could start to regulate who gets what, who's allowed to have a certain website. You literally could have to pay the FCC certain fines. The government could start to tax certain things that happen on the internet, specifically how data is transferred and that sort of thing. It opens up the door for a lot of things. This is speculation, to be fair. None of this has happened yet. But when the FCC writes a law and then ends with sort of this open-ended worded thing like, you know, to create fairness or whatever, it's so vague that they can sort of do what they want to. And they had a history in the past of doing things like promoting anti-competitive practice by allowing certain businesses, i.e. Comcast, to dominate certain parts of the country. They've allowed certain groups, TV set vendors and that sort of thing, to dominate at least the technology that exists here solely because of things like vendor lock-in, making customers like us solely dependent on a certain form of technology because we can't get it anywhere else. I.e., I can't get any more internet anywhere else from anybody besides Comcast.
The thing is that people are looking at this saying that it's going to protect the internet, but
I don't know if that's really an honest response. Like, if you were honest, like, okay, so let's talk specifically about the law.
Exactly.
What does it change right now? Pretty much nothing. The only thing it really changes is the FCC makes it so that Comcast can't charge Netflix more for access. And municipalities can start doing things. What does it change in the long run? It opens up a huge amount of possibilities. It could really be a negative.
And if we are really honest with ourselves, the government is almost never the most efficient way to regulate anything. I mean, if you think about it, there are cities out there who have actually taken and offered their public utilities to outside companies and said, here, take over this public utility because we're screwing it up. And when they did that, when they allowed them to come over, and I forget which cities in particular, and I forget if it was New Jersey. There we go.
New Jersey.
Water. Exactly.
New Jersey specifically, with their water. They had one of the worst water systems in the country. It was terrible. The water that came out was just terrible, and they couldn't handle it. No matter what they did, it would cost too much in taxes, and it would put too much of a burden on New Jersey. So they literally went and said, okay, anybody They did sort of like a petition like they'll
Exactly.
do. It's like, who can do this for the cheapest and create the best water quality? And a company showed up and said, yeah, we'll do it. They took over the water utility of New Jersey, and it's now considered
Exactly.
one of the best and cheapest water in the country. A private organization. Now you'd be like, oh, that evil corporations. Corporations have only one goal: to earn money.
Well, see, the thing is
to get you to buy it or buy their product or service. And if they produce something good enough,
the government, as
you're willing
opposed
to buy
to
they're
private
happy
business,
and
the government has no incentive to do it the best way. None. You're going to get paid. You're going to pay your taxes regardless, and they're going to get the money from you.
yeah, you're giving them
Exactly.
free
Now,
money.
a private
and you're not
company,
really
they have
getting much in
costs
return
that they have to
for it.
cover, they want to keep those as low as possible. So they're going to do the most efficient thing that they can do to get from point A to point B, which means basically offering you a service and
Yeah.
getting you to pay them money. And so that's usually, like, there are some things that the government does and does well. Usually it's gathering taxes.
Specifically, I don't know. I don't want to turn this into an anti-government thing, but it's like theoretically you could say conducting war. But then you
Right.
have scary private armies
Yeah.
like Blackwater who do it
Exactly.
better. You know what I mean?
But anyway,
You're
the
like,
thing is that
interesting.
I don't see how you can. Well, actually, what you could probably do is say, "Here's the internet. We need a private company to run this," and it would get done. But
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know if I have the answer. If you like the internet the way that it is, because there's been a long history. Look at the NSA. They spend all of their time spying on us. They literally put spy software so that they can access what's going on into laptops before they get out to vendors to be sold into the market. And it's a federal crime to remove that software. We know for a fact that the government is spying on us on a constant basis. They're looking through all of our information. Now, do you really want the government to be now
and
in
I told
control
Rhett
of the
this
internet
earlier. I
and
said they're
also
just going to
spying
do
on you
it.
at
We
the
might
same
as well
time?
just turn it over to them. But embrace it.
Just to embrace it. Let them have all access and information. It's like, let me leave you with something. I'll
right.
leave you with my last point, and then we'll turn it over to Jason. We'll leave you with something. If you like the internet the way that it is right now, or at least the way that it was before net neutrality, free internet. Well, not free internet, but free, sort of like free speech across the board. Neutral data, nothing. Everything's treated on an equal basis, at least data packets and how data information is transferred. Then why in hell are you asking the government
It's like
to protect that? Is that not the most Is that not why in the world? It's so contradictory to say I want the internet to be free. Would the organization that exists that spies on us and steals our information and restricts what's allowed to be seen on TV or heard on radio, would you come in and protect us, please? Is that not the dumbest thing you could possibly think of? The hypocrisy of people who out there are like, gosh dang it, I want the internet to be free and I don't want anybody to restrict it at all. Would giant, massive government please come in and take control, please?
I need to go to the store right now, so Cannibal Floyd, will you please watch my baby?
Freedom. Yeah, exactly. Is there not?
Yeah.
Can you not understand the contradiction here? Is it getting through? Do you disagree?
Now,
please post angry comments so I can roll my eyes. Look, I'll respond if you send us an angry email, or at least I'll respond verbally on the podcast. This will be on YouTube as well, so if you make a comment, then we'll respond to it. It doesn't bother me if you disagree, and I understand this is a controversial issue. But understand my position and speculation on the fact that I know everybody's afraid of large evil corporations, but I know where they stand. I know what a corporation wants to do because it wants money. And I understand its motivations clearly, and I know exactly what they want from me. Government's another thing. They want power. And with power, they kind of have to manipulate things. They need to understand what you're doing. They want to restrict your freedom so that they have more control. It becomes a messy, ugly thing.
The government can.
Corporations can't put me in prison.
And the government never had an Uncle Ben to tell him that with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, Spider-Man, you could teach us all a lesson. Or at least not Spider-Man, because he's gotten whiny and stupid at times. Uncle Ben, you died too soon.
Yeah.
Why won't you allow Aunt May to die?
Yeah, she wants to be with Uncle Ben. Let them be together.
She wants to meet him in the end.
Last thing I want to leave you with.
Hashtag kill Aunt May.
Think
anyway,
back,
go ahead, Jason.
and I know this is going to be kind of weird because a lot of people didn't grow up in this situation, but think back to the old telephone system. You have your landlines. Now, we're not saying that net neutrality in and of itself is bad. We're saying that the implementation of net neutrality is bad. Now, the reason that the phone system was so bad at the time was because if I wanted to make a long distance phone call, my phone call would go through several providers, and every provider my phone call went through to get to the eventual end point, I had to pay them. It wasn't like the phone company ate that cost for me. It's like, and I remember, my grandparents, they lived up in Oregon, and then they, eventually moved to Colorado. But, the thing is that we hardly ever called them because the long distance was so expensive. And that's what they're trying to prevent with the net neutrality. They're trying to prevent this, I'm going to go to Google, but their server is in New York. And so my signal to get to Google has to go through several states, and I don't want to have to pay every single ISP that my signal goes through to get to Google. Now, like I said, we're not saying that net neutrality in and of itself is bad. It's just that, do we want the FCC to be running this?
Yeah. I don't have a problem with non-restricting. That's a very fair point. I don't have a problem with the non-restricting.
And just because Comcast offers a fast lane to Netflix doesn't mean that that my internet is going to go slow. My internet actually might speed up at that point because there's going to be less traffic on my line. It's going to be on a faster line, on a fast track line that's dedicated just to Netflix. And so it could be that doing this where we say, if you're going to use more, you got to pay more. It could be that it would then improve the internet overall for everyone. Again, I'm not saying that we know the solution. We're just saying there are some problems with the way that this is being implemented, and we need to be aware of it.
Right. Don't never run open-armed and happy into the arms of the government. That's always a dangerous thing to do. I would eliminate some of the vague wording that exists in that law. I would eliminate the provincial thing for.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily do that, but I would throw it open for other companies to come in too.
I would. No. I would, specifically because I guarantee you
that if your city provides electricity for you as a utility, do you really think that the city is going to allow some like private corporation to show up and be like, look, we're going to compete with you, provide
Yes, that's
cheaper
true.
electricity? They're going to be like, no. Do you really think that some city is going to allow some like Comcast to come in and be like, yeah, we're going to private internet. We're going to provide some internet, and your city's going to be like, no.
That's true.
We want to corner the market because it's in our best interest to have everybody pay us for broadband. It will actually restrict competition, and I guarantee you your city can ask any price that they want.
Right.
Because they're not in a position to compete with anybody. They can't actually handle any competition. They're actually going to stifle anybody, and you'll be forced to pay your city like, I don't know, like electricity and water, like anything else, and you're just going to have to pay their prices. And they're going to show up at your doorstep constantly and be like, look, you're using too much. We're going to throttle you back a bit. Hey, guess what?
Right.
This is a government doing it. There's not much the FCC is going to do about it. Something else I would do is because these large, massive corporations, I would literally add some more laws where it allowed for, it made it impossible for different states and cities and municipalities to restrict private companies or startups to actually create their own broadband. I would make it. I would actually even the playing field across the board so that everybody would be forced to actually compete with one another. I would
and that's
literally
what the FCC
be out there
should be doing,
like trust busting and stuff. Like I would. That's what they should be doing.
Yeah, there you go.
First thing, take
and
Comcast
if you can,
into like 3 or 4 companies. Not allow Comcast to bind up with Time Warner, and all of a sudden,
that if you can, what you want to do is make it so that the companies, when you divide Comcast up, that the companies are in direct competition with each other, and not just like this part of Comcast gets New York and the northeastern area. This gets the Midwest. Yeah,
we have an understanding. We have an understanding, you guys.
Exactly.
I would force them to compete with one another, because when competition exists, the consumer wins, and eventually the person who provides the better service will be the one that comes out on the top. I would eliminate any restrictions you have across the board in any states or local municipalities. I would literally make it illegal for municipalities to just take extra money from things like ISPs and whatnot. I would do everything I could, and I would have to know more about how things are set up, but I would do everything I could to make it impossible for states and cities to restrict certain things so that only certain ISPs could be dominant. Like there's a lot that they could do that could actually help things, but they're not. Because they have no motivation, because once again, this has nothing to do with freedom and everything to do with money. It's about how much money the government gets from these corporations. It's how much money the corporations get from each other. It's about whether or not the government retains power and how much influence that they have. It has nothing to do with freedom. And if you think, and if you're sitting there afraid that you can't actually illegally download Game of Thrones,
well, that's about all we have.
That's the least of your problems.
Time for. We're actually going long here, so we'll cut it off and say hashtag Kill Aunt May, and see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Distracted Gamers podcast. If you like the show, follow Rhett and Jason, the world's 2 most lethally stupid internet personalities, on Twitter @DG Podcast, or check them out at www.thedistractedgamers.com. If you loved or hated what you've heard here, email them at thedistractedgamers.blogspot.com and share your feelings. Not that Jason will care, since he hasn't any, of course.